right. Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the Unfounded Podcast. I want to thank you for joining me here in this special episode. This is going to be a little different today. As you can tell, if you listened to last episode, I'm starting a lot of new things right now. That's kind of the energy for us right now in general in the collective. So the last episode, the channeled messages, that's going to be a series. I'll have those posted weekly. Those are live episodes that I repost here as a podcast episode, so you can access them. Very spiritual. They're channeled messages, so it leans more on the spiritual side. And if you're more, if you listen to the podcast for more of that message, those are the episodes to really look for, because there's a ton of content, a ton of synchronicity in it. But I'm also kind of wanting to ground myself in the physical world too, somewhat, and what's going on modern day, contemporary issues, things like that. And so I'm going to start making episodes, as you can see right here, that are based more in what's going on in the world right now. So I've outlined and done a little more planning ahead of time than I usually do in most episodes. Not much, but a little, to get this one started. It's going to be a little different. I'd recommend, if you haven't already, checking out the podcast on Spotify, following it on there. It's free. Because through Spotify, you can actually access the video version of the podcast, which is going to be consistently released now. I used to do audio and video kind of partially, depending on if I had the ability to record at the time, but it's going to be consistently video episodes now, both those live episodes, the channeled messages, and the ones that you're going to be seeing here now, the traditional Unfounded Podcast episodes. I'm going to be using video from around the web. You're going to be able to come along with me, as some of you may have noticed a couple years back when I was doing live episodes with the research that I do, learning in real time and asking the unfounded questions about what's going on in our world and seeing how we can apply some of those principles to what's going on in our own lives. And so with this episode today, I got some interesting kind of fun things to look at and to jump into right away. But in general, the topics today, the topic today is focusing on authenticity. It's a topic that's been popping up a lot recently, and something that I wanted to focus on in today's episode. And I wanted to start off the episode actually by talking about, one of the most popular kind of happenings right now over the last couple of weeks is actually a specific individual. His name's Oliver Anthony, I believe, and we'll check him out here. You can see him if you're watching on Spotify right now. You can check out the video portion of the episode, but I'm going to play the video of Oliver Anthony here. He's a musician. Before I get too ahead of myself, I'll kind of explain to you a little bit about who he is, that I found on TikTok, and many people have started to follow over TikTok because he released this one song. I'll kind of read you off a billboard here a little bit about Oliver Anthony. Men North of Richmond is the song that he has released. He's released a couple other ones since then, but he did it via TikTok, as many artists are doing nowadays. And it kind of exploded, went viral. I saw it maybe a couple weeks ago and shared it right away. It hit me really hard because it's a powerful song, as you'll hear yourself here in a minute. But it kind of kept popping up on my feed over and over again. And because of the message of it, because of how authentic the song is, I wanted to play it on here to start the episode, to kind of set the tone and kind of open up the conversation, and to kind of demonstrate the new format that we're going to be going with in the future. Apologies right now, I'm trying to work through a little anxiety because this is a little bit of a new format and I have to control more than I usually do, so I'm controlling the video and everything while I'm doing the podcast, so it's a little more stressful than I'm used to normally. But as we expand, this is a message for everybody listening right now, we kind of have to push out of our comfort zone, and as we do that, we'll create something worth value, something interesting, something novel, and something that may surprise us even. So let's check out Oliver Anthony a little bit here. So this is Oliver Anthony, and this is a clip from the video you'll see here in just a second. He has, I don't know exactly where he's from, we'll probably find out here, Virginia country singer, so he's from Virginia. That makes sense because it's Men North of Richmond is the name of the song. Singer Oliver Anthony, a former factory worker, is going viral thanks to his song Rich Men North of Richmond. A scathing tale of greed and injustice that is rapidly being embraced and promoted by right-wing pundits. And there's a political message to this, so I just picked a random website. Billboard seemed fitting because it deals with music to read, but this is going to obviously have a political tint because most platforms do nowadays. I want you as a listener to engage with this content honestly and ask yourself how it makes you feel, right? We'll read through a little bit of the Billboard commentary here, and hopefully it doesn't get too unhelpful, right? Then we'll just listen to it for ourselves, and I'll let you decide. So, give me a second here. I need to breathe a little bit. And any of you listening right now, that might be something that you're going through right now. Again, I'm not trying to make these very spiritual messages as part of the podcast, but the unfounded episodes, traditional episodes. But that is something that we all need to do in the modern day, is slow down and enjoy the moment, or get back into the moment, right? When we let ourselves get overworked or over anxious or over focused on doing something, we lose track of the point, the purpose of doing it, which is the process, right? As I say that, I feel a relief coming over me. So I hope you're feeling the same thing wherever you're listening to this or watching this. So I'm going to keep reading here from Billboard. I've been selling my, and before I move on, let me read the who wrote this. Apologies. This is by Jessica Nicholson, and I'll have all the links in the show notes for you guys if you want to check them out yourself. Okay. I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay. He sings in the song's opening lines. A video posted by Radio WV shows Anthony offering an acoustic performance, funneling the pain, frustration, and angst of the working class into lines that rage against greedy rich men. The song takes on high taxes, abusive welfare, and selfish politicians, with lyrics that have resonated mightily with music listeners. Elsewhere, he sings, "Lord, we got folks in the streets, ain't got nothing to eat, and the obese smoking welfare. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds." Now, this is a point I want to sit on for a second here. When you, and this happens with comedy too, when you take just like the lyrics of something and you take it away from the vibe of it, the energy of it, the sound of it, you'll see it comes off a little differently. As we read this, as I read that, the lyrics sound almost silly. Some of them do, right? But when you listen back to the song, at least when I listened back to the song, there was a resonant quality that hit me very deeply. So that's a little bit about Anthony, and I just wanted to read a little bit from this article, but obviously it's got a little bit of I can feel already, it's got a little bit of a pull or a view to it. So we're going to move on from this and just check out the video and listen to it. So this is about a 3-minute long song. Guys, his name's Oliver Anthony, so please support him, regardless of how you feel about the song, or if you do enjoy the song especially. Go give him a follow on TikTok, try to find him on any of their social media platforms, support content creators like this, or people like this, musicians like this, artists like this that are speaking authentically. Again, whether or not you agree with what they're saying, you can tell, and I hope you can feel through this song that this man believes what he's saying. So, and that's really the point of today's episode, and kind of the energy right now that we're all being asked to step into is authenticity. That's always the message, but now more so than most times. So without further ado, Oliver Anthony.
I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men, north of Richmond. I wish politicians would look out for minors, and not just minors on an island somewhere. Lord, we got folks in the street
He's
ain't
telling
got
them,
nothing to eat, and the obese milking welfare. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down. Lord, it's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is. Living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just want to have total control. Want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men north of Richmond. I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay.
Now, matter of fact, I'd never heard it all the way through. I just heard little verses of it, but all the way together like that, it hits a little differently. You can. So, as you can probably tell as a listener, at least for me, that song was very powerful. Is very powerful when I listen to it. You can feel there's an authenticity. There's something different about that type of music, what he's creating there. And I feel like there's something in this message that is kind of resonating with people, because it's almost like a battle cry or a what's the right word? That's not the right way to put it, but it's like a waking up point. There's something in the lyrics of the song that resonate with people, and I've seen people reposting of all walks of life, right? Not just people you consider conservative. Obviously, if you're viewing it politically, you could tell that the lyrics have a more contemporarily conservative tint. But in general, it's actually more of a populist message that I'm hearing coming through in this. A message about people not having enough and struggling. And matter of fact, one of the things that comes through and hits me the hardest, you could hear me comment as I was listening to that. Excuse me, give me 1 second. It's the part where he talks about young men putting themselves 6 feet in the ground because this damn world just keeps pushing him down. Something like that. And I do think that this is a message that needs to be said, that is kind of crying to be said, crying out to be spread. And it's the reason why it's not more often is sad. It has to do with the way in which we as men, aren't allowed as we grow up to connect with the part of ourselves that speaks authentically in the way that you're hearing in this song. Because I believe it does connect with a more emotional and thus perceived soft side of yourself. Vulnerability has that quality to it. You'll find that as you work on yourself throughout your life. Sorry for that. As you kind of, synchronicities popping through there. As you work on yourself, you'll notice that you develop compassion for people, places, and things that you never had compassion for if you're doing it properly. But I thought that was a good way to start off the episode here, because there is something happening right now. If you're listening to this, there's something happening around the world, and it's because there's so many drastic things changing for so many people all at once. There's a war going on, and food prices and the economies are crashing, and governments are clashing, in places outside of the war. The war's kind of affecting everything. And then in general, there's not very many places in the world, because the United States used to be the bastion of this, where people can look and trust their government, or feel safe, or even trust the place they work, and that comes through in this song, right? And that's you'll find a great artwork throughout history. That's what it does, is it taps into the zeitgeist, the populace, and it finds something that's true, through that individual experience. We've talked about this before on the podcast, but your individual experience is extremely important. And Oliver Anthony is taking his individual lived experience, his pain, and he's enunciating it. Now, that may not, as we heard in that Rolling Stone or Billboard article, resonate with everybody's perspective and worldview. But what it does do is come across as true regardless when you listen to it, because it's authentic, because he's being authentic. And because of that, other people that are experiencing or have experienced similar things to him are willing to speak out and say, yes, I feel that way. As a matter of fact, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, like I was saying, this is not a political message that leans left or right. This is one that is more on the populist end of the spectrum, which kind of branches the middle of both. Both parties modern day have used the populist message to their advantage, and then thrown it away as soon as they got in political power. This is something that I believe the people has to grow through a grassroots type of way, and you see this starting to happen through figures like Oliver Anthony. There's other videos of his, but I don't want to go around just showing all of his content for him, right? I'd rather have you as a listener go and check him out and support him directly. But that where he's talked about, that he wants to go about creating music and artwork as he goes forward a different way, and not getting caught in the whirlwind of becoming something and popular and things like this, allowing it to change him. And I think this is an honorable pursuit, something that many of us find ourselves trying to aim towards throughout our life. You see a lot of political figures and business people aim for the same goal, right? And miss as they go along that path. And so I think the reason why figures like Mr. Anthony give me hope or are inspiring is because their authenticity speaks of their ability to actually do what they're saying, right? And to, to use a modern term, glow up in the proper way, right? And to demonstrate and be an example for people, our children, but also, the other human beings around the world, of exactly what is needed more in the world. Like, again, regardless of whether you agree with exactly what he's saying. I believe, and I feel very deeply right now, that you, as a listener who's ever listening to this, watching this right now, that you have a purpose similar to Mr. Anthony's, but it's not exactly the same thing, right? But there's a truth that you need to say. It has to come out it can come out in as beautiful of a way, right? But in order to do that, it requires a lot of courage. It requires all of the virtues that you see kind of imbued in the heroes in our classical movies, our mythological tales. And so this is the hero's journey, the hero's path that we're all asked to go on in some way. And this is the modern version of it, at least, that we're being asked to go on. You have the ability, as a modern human being, with things like the cell phone that you're probably watching this on, to communicate in a way around the world that you never could before. That's one of the things that shocked me about this podcast and the reach it's had. I never imagined the amount of countries, how many would be a part of this. Matter of fact, I'll show you guys here so that you can get an idea, because I've talked about it before, but it's really shocking how many places around the world listen to even this small, humble podcast, right? The Unfounded Podcast. Let me pull it up here for you guys really quick. Give me a second. I hope you're enjoying the new setup too. I've been experimenting for a while and wanting to get something that would be a little more aesthetically pleasing for the listeners and a little more consistent for content that I create. So that's why there's a little bit of nerves starting this episode. Apologies, but it's a different setup. I have to control things now. I can't just be sitting here and talking. So like I said, I'm if this episode comes off a little slow to begin with, I apologize. That's going to be why, but we got to roll with it, right? So this is kind of the podcast website that I use, but I'm going to go to some of the analytics and show you guys some behind the scenes stuff here. So again, it's not a massive podcast. I don't have a ton of people that listen to this all the time, right? But what I want to show you is by geographic location, how it's broken down, right? So look at this, 84% United States. But as we scroll down here, look at the amount of countries, and it just keeps going. And you can click on these and you can find the different regions in these countries in which people are listening. And so I show you this again, not to gloat or anything like that. It's to demonstrate that your voice has a reach that you won't realize, that I didn't realize when I created this, when I started this. If you go listen to the first episode, you'll understand through just the way I'm talking, how much different I was and how little confidence I had in what I was creating, right? But to go from that to even, something like this, where it's gone around the world, literally, my voice is something that's really beautiful, and it's a message that is possible for anyone nowadays, modern days, with what you hold in your hand, right? So if there's something that you feel like you need to say or you've been wanting to say it, right? Just make sure it's you. That's a little bit harder process to figure out sometimes, to know growing up and expanding in a world that kind of tells you the wrong way to do it, through believing in things that aren't true. Yeah. We then start to resonate with what's not true instead of what is true, and we confuse what is true. It actually becomes our enemy in some ways. We misperceive it. So there's a process, if we're that deep, in which we have to disentangle ourselves somewhat, right? So anyway, I kind of wanted to show you guys that just so you could understand that it really is possible. Whatever your dream is, whatever you're thinking about doing, if there's something you want to say, it may not ever become something that's going to make you a millionaire or make you extremely famous or something like that, but it could just have the reach that you are dreaming of, and so act on that, that part of your vision that is a little less firm, but requires, you to make it that way, you to believe in it, to make it more firm, you to translate your idea into reality, right? It's coming through really heavily right now. I say I want to make these episodes less about channeled messages and things, but to be quite honest, obviously, guys, I have a hard time choosing when that happens. So while I do intend to make the channeled messages episodes, the more spiritual episodes, this is obviously going to still have a lot of spiritual content in it, or spiritual messages. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed Oliver Anthony. And I just wanted to share that with you because it is kind of something that's really blowing up right now. I'm sure it's going to be part of the political conversation moving forward into the election season. And it'll be, I think, kind of what's the right way? The way you feel about that song, I think, is going to kind of determine what end of the spectrum you fall on politically moving forward, or it could, because it does kind of describe the way you're experiencing and viewing the world right now. And there's nothing wrong with either end of the spectrum you fall on. I want you to know that, right? But even if it's the opposite of what I'm saying in the way I'm viewing him, that's fine, right? Thank you for still listening if you're still listening to this. But that being said, we still have, I think, to recognize, like I said earlier, that the authenticity is the point. Whatever your version of it is, when said in the proper way, it doesn't need defending. So it will glow up in the way that Oliver Anthony is glowing up right now when it is resonating with the world properly. And that's just about truth, about how willing you're to be radically honest. And that sounds kind of silly sometimes too, almost motivational speechy, right? But it's not. It's radical honesty is something that demands incredible courage, right? It's the internal version of heroism, I think, something like that. And so you save yourself when you decide to be honest with yourself in that way. So let's move on. I have a little more content. We're going to switch gears a little bit. I hope you enjoyed that first segment there to start things off on authenticity. But I have another segment here that I wanted to bring in because this gentleman, I believe his name is Shawn Ryan. Let me bring him up here. Shawn Ryan, yes. So Shawn Ryan Show is a podcast. It's a really interesting show that I kind of popped up on my feed maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I started listening to him. He's a veteran himself, an I believe, Navy SEAL. And he has a lot of vets on, a lot of very intense stories, war stories, things like that. So some of his content's probably not for everybody. But he also has been getting more into more controversial subjects and topics and very interesting people. Because as his show's gaining popularity, he's starting to get more attention from high level people that don't do interviews as often. This gentleman that I'll throw up on screen for you right now, his name is Brandon Fugal, and you may have recognized him from the show The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. So this gentleman, Brandon Fugal, is the owner, actually, the current owner of Skinwalker Ranch. Now, Skinwalker Ranch, I'll give you a little bit of brief history of Skinwalker Ranch. It is a very interesting place. Many of you may have heard of it. Apologies if you're already familiar, but I'm going to just read a little bit of it. So Skinwalker Ranch is a ranch in Utah, and UFO reports in the Uinta Basin is where it's located, were publicized in the 1970s. Claims about the ranch first appeared in 1996 in the Salt Lake City, Utah Deseret News, and later in the alternative weekly Las Vegas Mercury, as a series of articles by investigative journalist George Knapp. So many of you may be familiar with George from the stories. If you listen to Joe Rogan and you heard of Bob Lazar, those stories, he's a very famous reporter out of Las Vegas, Nevada. I used to live in Las Vegas. And a lot of the Area 51 black site kind of conspiracy stuff, George Knapp has covered and served as almost a liaison between the media and figures like Bob Lazar, people that were trying to be whistleblowers since way back in the 80s. So George Knapp ran some very interesting, and matter of fact, I can probably pull it up for us here real quick. Very interesting reporting way back in the 80s. Like I said, broadcasting the story of Bob Lazar before anybody really had heard a story like it. And so it was really radical and a really dangerous thing to do. Let's see if we can find something on him real quick. Hang in there, guys. And this is part of the show as well. This is partially why I recommend that you download the Spotify app, because now I'm going to be doing a lot more video. So there will be little gaps in between with audio. And if that's the case, just sit back, enjoy the music while I'm looking up things. But part of the point of this long version of the episodes or the podcast is to be able to do research real time and to follow rabbit holes to see what we can learn and find on our own. And I find it really interesting and fun myself. This is kind of what I do by myself a lot of the time when I find an interesting subject. So I want to share that with you as a listener and kind of have that adventure together. So let's see if we can find or watch together the news report that George Knapp broadcast back in the 80s. Let me see here, guys. Sorry, I'm probably making some funny faces here. I'm not used to having the camera in front of me. George Knapp. Let's do Bob Lazar. George Knapp. Yeah. I'm a little too close to the camera on the other one too here. For those of you watching in the vertical view on TikTok or Instagram. Let's see. Little movies. I think this would be one. Let's just take a little bit of this one.
This week in our series of reports on UFOs, we've learned a number of things. That not everybody who sees a UFO is crazy, that our government has lied about UFO information, that it's withheld UFO files, and even spied on UFO witnesses. We've also heard from scientists who say life elsewhere in the universe is virtually a certainty. And we heard that a majority of Americans believe that UFOs are real and come from space. Tonight, in part 5 of his report, George Knapp introduces us to a local man with an amazing and disturbing story. George.
Gary and Mary Ruth, we've been working on this story for a long time, and we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first. This week, we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government. While that may be hard to believe coming from the UFO perspective, We've certainly learned in Watergate and the Iran-Contra scandal that factions within our government can and do pursue their own hidden agendas outside of the law, outside the control of Congress, or the knowledge of the American people. This is exactly the type of operation we'll hear about tonight. It's a chilling scenario with worldwide implications that may have its roots right here.
Apologies, I didn't mean to speak over him. I'm getting used to it myself. Just to remind you, this is in 1987, I believe is what it says here. So this is a long time ago, and you can, as you're hearing him say some of these things, these are radical things to say today. These are things that are labeled conspiracies today, right? That can get you canceled. This is a really radical position to be taking, George Knapp here, and partially why I wanted to show you part of this video, just to kind of show you who he is and how long he's been in the field, so that we can kind of get a basis to understand what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch and how Mr. Fugal plays into everything, right? Because a lot of what's going on right now, especially with the alien release of information surrounding aliens and alien technology and all of that, it's very confusing. I'm sure you're confused as a listener, how to feel, because that's at least how I'm feeling right now. Because this is a topic that I'm sure you, just like I, dreamed about when we were kids, finding out or learning about as you watch Star Trek or Star Wars, being able to meet an alien or realize that they're real to begin with. That seemed like it would be such a radical shift and a gift, a very specific type of gift, that would be, something that only very few human beings in the span of, humanity's existence have been able to experience. And so the fact that we've already experienced it, basically, it's kind of like, did I miss the party? That's how I'm feeling, at least. Did I miss the party? So I feel compelled, as we go on this kind of topic today of authenticity, obviously switching lanes, going from Oliver Anthony to aliens right away, but that's the reason why I'm trying to focus on just being anything authentic right now and see where it takes us, right? Let's watch a little more of this video. I will give you links to all of these videos in the show notes, and anything that would be like I'll try to not show anything, obviously, that would be infringing on people's work, like movies and things like that. Oliver Anthony's, the reason I showed the full video is because he's just blowing up right now, and I feel like it's beneficial to kind of share his story while he's coming up, while he's spreading. So I hope that's not violating any copyright terms or anything like that. Anyway, let's continue to watch.
Area 51, that mysterious corner of the Nevada test site, is no longer much of a secret. The fact that secretive things go on here is a given, even to the Soviets, who make daily spy flights over the facility to take a peek at what's going on. These photos, never before shown in public, are about as close as anyone will ever come to seeing what the place looks like again. The dry bed of Groom Lake, corrugated metal buildings, a 3-mile-long runway, and some highly sophisticated radar and detection equipment. It's been known by many names over the years: Dreamland, the Ranch, the Skunk Works. If ever there was a place to test a secret new technology, this is it. And that's exactly what's been done here for decades. Area 51 is where Francis Gary Powers and the other U-2 pilots were trained in the 50s, and where the U-2 itself was developed. The SR-71 spy planes that spotted Soviet missiles in Cuba in the early 60s.
He's going to explain more on Area 51. I'm sure you're familiar with Area 51. I just kind of hit my head as I was watching that. Let's see if George Knapp has any reporting on Skinwalker Ranch real quick before we continue with Skinwalker Ranch. So I'll type that in and we'll continue just explaining what Skinwalker Ranch is. These early stories detailed the claims of a family that allegedly experienced inexplicable and frightening events after they purchased and occupied the property. The ranch, located in West Uinta, for mispronouncing, county bordering the Uinta and Ouray Indian Reservation, was popularly dubbed the UFO Ranch due to its ostensible 50-year history of odd events said to have taken place there. According to Kelleher and Knapp, they saw or investigated evidence of close to 100 incidents that include vanishing and mutilated cattle, sightings of unidentified flying objects or orbs, large animals with piercing red eyes that they say were unscathed when struck by bullets, and invisible objects emitting destructive magnetic fields. Among these involved were retired U.S. Army Colonel John B. Alexander, who characterized the NID science efforts as an attempt to get hard data using a standard scientific approach. However, the investigators admitted to difficulty obtaining evidence consistent with scientific publication. Cattle mutilations have been part of the folklore of the surrounding area for decades. When Robert Bigelow, founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science, purchased the ranch for $200,000 in 1996, this was reportedly the result of this having been convinced by the stories of mutilations. By his having been convinced, by the stories of mutilations that included tales of strange lights and unusual impressions made in grass and soil, told by the family of former ranch owner Terry Sherman. So, the ownership is something I want to cover here really quick. That gives you a little bit of a history on him. We'll read about the ownership and we'll go back to see what we can find on George Knapp's reporting of Skinwalker Ranch, because he was one of the first people, it sounds like, to kind of go and investigate the ranch. Excuse me for all the pauses to take a drink, but my mouth and throat are kind of dry today, so I might have to do that more often than I usually do, for those of you are returning listeners. Okay, so you can see here ownership. Kenneth and Edith Myers were the original owners, and they owned it. They lived there a long time. Everybody, from what I know, reported oddities happening on the land, especially the Native Americans. From listening to this episode that we'll watch a little bit of here in a second, from the Shawn Ryan Show, there was a Native American folklore, essentially, mythology that surrounded the area for a very long time. That even modern day, many of the native tribes around the area won't even look in the direction of the ranch because it's considered to be so cursed, essentially, right? And they make offerings. It's a part of the episode we won't watch here. Brandon, Mr. Fugal here, was talking about when he first purchased the property. He went out and was exploring it the first day he had closed on it. And around the fence line, there were animal bladders that were hanging on the fence line, and he was kind of freaked out and asked the people that were there to kind of hand over the property to him what that was about. And he told them, the person told them that it's the Native Americans that live in the area that do that as an offering to kind of appease the spirits, to make sure that they don't follow them out. And that's when he told them about not looking in the area even sometimes. So some odd things happening in there, but Kenneth and Edith Myers lived there for a very long time. I believe they died there, if I'm not mistaken, from what he said yesterday. And then it was transferred to Terry and Gwen Sherman. I believe they were the ones that had some of the craziest stuff happen. A lot of cattle mutilations. They were cattle ranchers, I believe. And then Robert Bigelow, who was a aerospace, you may recognize his picture there, businessman. He developed, I forget what he was into, but he was into a bunch of different things that kind of makes it odd that he was studying, a Skinwalker Ranch. Many believe the reason is kind of closely related to the reason we're starting to understand the ties between, Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, these kind of companies, and, futuristic technology, alien technology, things like that. Stories for like Bob Lazar's, where he reported, having these black sites and organizations that were doing this, that were outside of the government themselves. So Robert Bigelow has been kind of in this realm for a very long time as well. And as a matter of fact, from this episode that we're about to listen to some clips from, Brandon Fugal was saying that when he bought it, Mr. Bigelow did not want to sell this property, specifically because he had had so many negative experiences. Excuse me. Negative experiences personally that had affected his life, that he never was clear in whether he was like scared that he would pass it on, or whether it was just something he wasn't, he didn't want to let go of, based on what they'd found there. He wasn't sure. And so he was really surprised, Brandon Fugal was, when he went to purchase it, when he heard that it came up for sale, because it was never officially placed for sale, that he was able to purchase it. And Brandon initially, and I remember, many of you may have remembered this, because Skinwalker Ranch has been in the news for a very long time, in media and around aliens for a long time. And when I was a kid, I remember back not a kid, but in 2016, I remember hearing that somebody bought Skinwalker Ranch that it sold, and it was some mysterious buyer, right? He was anonymous. This was Brandon Fugal, but he wanted to remain anonymous. Now, I'm giving you all this backstory before we watch this because it's necessary. This is a very long form episode, and I don't want to kind of show you the entire thing, obviously, because it would take up the entire podcast. So I picked 2 specific clips out of it from what I've listened to so far to kind of talk about and look at today. But this is a 2-part episode, and for some reason it's also being censored as of today. I just realized when I looked on Shawn Ryan's page, it's starting to be censored by YouTube, which is kind of odd when you listen to the conversation. But there's 2 parts to it now. So there's another 2.5-hour part after this. The first hour and a half was really just about that background that I was telling you about there. So Brandon Fugal bought initially. He remained anonymous because he didn't want it to affect his business ventures. He's a real estate mogul, essentially. He's a self-made businessman. So he didn't want people essentially to think he was crazy while he was doing this research. But he brought in physicists and scientists. He was a skeptic himself, and wanted to see whether there was any there about everything that was, reported on the land. And that's kind of where we pick up here as we look into the YouTube episode. Before we do that, let's see if we can find, like we were saying, anything on Skinwalker Ranch from George Knapp. I want to find like actual... Okay, I think we'll just go and watch the YouTube episode because I want to try to steer away from anything that's, somebody's individually produced content. News organizations like what we watch, things like that, that's usually okay. But to use in this form, to reuse. But that kind of stuff I want to be careful with. So this is the first clip I have for us today, guys. This is from the Shawn Ryan Show. Again, Shawn Ryan has said explicitly, he says at the beginning of every episode, he's okay with us using these clips as long as we shout them out. So Shawn Ryan, thank you. First for being a veteran. I'm a veteran myself, so thank you for your service. And also thank you for doing this, continuing to serve in this way, allowing us to use this media, spread the message. I appreciate you. So shout out to that, guys. Go and check out Shawn Ryan Show. Follow it on all of the major podcast platforms, but specifically you can watch it on YouTube. It's a really kind of well-produced show as well, high-quality show. So without further ado, this is a story from right after, about 6 months or so after Brandon Fugal bought the property. It's one of the first experiences he has on the property. And why I picked it out is because it's an experience that I've had myself, something that's kind of a really intense experience that many of you that are listening right now may have experienced as well. And I think it's more common than people think, and it's something we write off, I think, usually as like a sensation oddity or something. That's how it's coming through. Like we think it's like a malfunction for a second or something, but we don't give it enough credit. There's something going on that we're sensing energetically, and this is, I think why it's so important is because Brandon here is somebody that is a self-proclaimed skeptic. As you listen to the first couple hours of this episode, you can hear him say that the reason he purchased this is he didn't believe in it. He wanted to see if there's any there, and essentially didn't think there was going to be. And after 6 months, this is what he experienced. So
we kind of lost track of him, and everyone said, "Well, when we all piled out of the open air Polaris, UTV, the Ranger, no one really paid attention." And I said, "Well, let me go try to find him." So I proceed to walk around to the back of the Homestead 3, to find George. And right as I'm coming around the corner in this grass area where we'd parked it, and the vehicle being off in the distance, it was as if something cupped my ears. It was all of my hearing was impacted. It was as if I walked into a soundproof room. Have you ever been into an anechoic chamber or a soundproof room?
I have.
And that sensation, the only thing you can do to simulate it right now is by cupping your ears.
It's like a frequency change.
Yeah, all of the ambient noise disappears. And I thought it was the strangest thing. It was the strangest sensation. And then I see off in the distance, standing fully upright, this 6'6" giant of a man in the back of this UTV. And I thought, that's odd. So I yell his name, George. I can hear kind of muffled. It's almost like yelling underwater. I thought that was strange. And I proceed to walk to get closer, and he's not responding. And as I near the vehicle and shout his name again, he's standing upright with his eyes closed. And right as I'm nearing the vehicle, all of the ambient noise, all of the sound comes back, is restored. And as I yell his name again, his eyes fluttered open. And he looked down at me. And I said, "What's going on? Did something happen? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, that was weird." And I asked him, I said, "What was weird? What is weird?" And he says, "Well, when you all jumped out, when you pulled up and you stopped the vehicle and you all jumped out, I stood up and found myself paralyzed. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, and then everything went black." And he asked, how long have I been here? And I said, "About 10 minutes. And he just shook his head, was obviously disturbed. I asked him, I said, "Has this ever happened to you in your life? Have you ever had this experience?" And he said, "No, I've never experienced anything like this." 10 minutes had passed. Who knows what happened, but he felt odd. He expressed the fact that he felt a little bit off, and we proceeded to gather everyone up and jump back in the vehicles. And so as we're going back to retrieve our phones to have our cameras, we're driving on that dirt road at the base of the mesa. You know, that main road that you see on the docuseries that runs east-west on the property. And as we're about halfway back to Homestead 1, or the ranch house, or the command center as we now call it, the other security professional in the back starts shouting, "Stop the vehicle, stop the vehicle." And I'm driving, I'm just trucking along, driving this little Polaris UTV. And I look back and he's waving his hands, pointing up ahead. So I bring the vehicle to a stop. And he's just shouting. He says, "Look at that, look at that." And sure enough, I look right where he's pointing, right ahead of us, right above the mesa at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on October 14th. And there is a 40, 50 foot long silver grayish disc-like object. What can only be described as a flying saucer. And it's just sitting there in broad daylight, clear as day, right above the mesa. Probably about 100 feet above the mesa or so. And we're all sitting there astonished. I'm like, "You guys see that?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's what I was trying to get you to stop the vehicle." Within a couple of seconds, it changes position. It literally blinked from one position to another. Either it moved with split-second speed, or it was able to change position through some other means, but it moves about 50 feet to the left or to the north. We all...
Like it appeared 50 feet to the left, or you actually saw it move?
It was like, in the blink of an eye, it could change position and move that quickly. We all sat there astonished and said, "Whoa, did you see that?" Seconds later, it drops to just kind of a low hover above the mesa. It literally changes position and drops right above the mesa. Still sitting there, clear as day. It was almost like a video game. It was surreal. And then within a few seconds later, it darts to the right. We're all, with every movement, we're gasping. We're saying, "Are you watching this? Do you see this?" And then within about 20 seconds from the start of the event, it is gone. It appeared that it either went to a dot as if it were darting off into the distance at split-second speed, or it was literally phasing out of our perception instantaneously. But it was gone. And that whole event, spanning about 20 seconds, that I saw right in front of us with multiple witnesses at my side that I had not met before that day, that had professed the same skepticism that morning, sat there changed forever. In that moment, Shawn, I went from being an open-minded skeptic to an experiencer. It wasn't about belief.
Damn. Right. So I hope all of you watching resonated with that or enjoyed that at the very least. Because I find that story incredibly entrancing, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Brandon is very well spoken, obviously, and somebody that is very successful in the world. So we've heard stories from, at this point, military members, ex employees of these different organizations and companies. We haven't really had many entrepreneurial types like Brandon who are doing this out of their own pocket, interested in this, that have the resources to really invest in it, that were also very skeptical when they entered, right? You can really see there, and this is why I bring up this clip of the video, the authenticity in which he's telling this story, right? And that's partially why it's so important to share right now, why I think this is going to be a pretty important video. I'm sure it'll be pretty popular, is probably why it's being censored right now, is because this kind of authenticity is becoming more common. It's in different forms, right? This is Brandon Fugal's version of it. Oliver Anthony's you heard earlier, right? And it doesn't have to be on the same subject, the same things, right? It's beautiful either way. It's entrancing either way. I don't know about you, but as I was listening to his story there about what happened to him, there's much more to it. So I'll leave the rest for you to go in that specific part of it for you to go check out. There's one more clip I'll show you here in a little bit. But I'd like you to, obviously engage with the content yourself through Shawn's site. But that being said, I've experienced, and many of you listening may have experienced at some point, some of the things that Brandon was describing, specifically that muffled ear experience, is something that I've had happen very many times over the awakening specifically, but also when I was younger, very young specifically. I had it happen quite a bit when I would be in places that, could be haunted, is the best way to explain it, right? Places that would be if they are, where I've had that experience and wrote it off very quickly, and was afraid, kind of out of shock, kind of pushed it down. But as hearing like I said, a somewhat well-balanced, well-established person describe the same experience lends it a lot of credibility. And for those of us, in the world that have experienced that throughout our lives, it can help us recognize that we are experiencers, like Brandon was describing, right? I hadn't heard it put that way, this is why I tagged this clip and why I wanted to show it and bring it to the podcast, because I loved the way he put that he went from being a skeptic to an experiencer. And he said, not a believer, an experiencer, right? And that's a beautiful and a spiritual message. It's something that I've experienced myself over the last couple of years of this awakening experience, this brutal awakening experience, right? The end of it, that I've started to recognize that the reason waking up takes so long, the reason that sometimes we have to go through a down before an up, is because it kind of gives us the experience that's necessary to transmute what we usually refer to as belief into experience, like that, to where you literally don't have to question it. It's still what you believe, but it's backed up through your experience. That's a different version of belief that Brandon is, Brandon Fugal here is enunciating very well. And something that I think is necessary for us all to recognize, what have you experienced in that way that you've written off, that you haven't validated, right? Because unless in a world that typically tells us that we're crazy if we say these things out loud, we often won't say them. I'll take this time frame here to explain to you one of my experiences, one of my foundational experiences in life. Alien visitation that happened to me a couple of years back, that just saying it out loud kind of sounds silly. It has that connotation, even though we know these things are real nowadays, but nevertheless, it still does have that type of feeling to it. I was in Washington State, northern Washington, a couple of years ago on a vacation with my ex-fiance and her kids and some friends. And we went up there to visit some people, and we stayed up in the mountains right near the border of Canada. And it's in Bigfoot country, which, up until this point, up until this trip, I had never really considered Bigfoot anything more than just a myth, right? But once we got up there, we realized very quickly that the people that lived in this small town area of northern Washington believed, a very rural area, believed very deeply and had experienced in the way that Brandon was kind of just demonstrating things that they couldn't explain. And so their belief it was a different version of it. And I noticed that. And right when we got there, it was a very kind of common topic that people would talk about. Interesting synchronicities, the notification going off here. But as we went up to our campsite, which was up in the mountains, kind of deep into it, we noticed that the energy was interesting. Not just interesting, it was kind of off in a certain way. It felt foreboding is the word that's coming to mind. Like there was something watching you all the time, which especially at nighttime, you'll notice that woods have that quality, but this area has a different version of it. So we got up there and we were staying on a kind of a makeshift campsite from a gentleman. His name was Two Eagles, and he had set up some teepees and things and tent sites and right in the middle of the mountains and just on his property. So we were staying there, and we've been there a couple nights. The first day or so, we decided to explore a little bit, and we went walking around, and we realized very quickly that it wasn't really condoned to do that there. Like exploring around was not something that you were supposed to do. We started walking down some paths, and you saw some driveways, and there was people that were standing outside, and we went to wave, hey. And they just stared at us. And it was the weirdest, most chilling experience. It felt like you were in kind of one of those horror movies, right? You could tell that people didn't want you there, and that they wanted to know why the hell you were there. So that the people that were in that area had this kind of isolated quality. They didn't want to be bothered, right? We went down to visit some of my ex's family or friends in town later that day, and we were talking and we were explaining where we had been exploring, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you don't want to do that." And we're like, "Why?" And like, "This is we don't think you don't understand. This is the backwoods, man. Like this, you go down certain roads, and people have the right to shoot you. You go on their property, and they will." And I was like, "Whoa." I'm sitting here thinking like, that's intense. So again, I'm telling you all this to set the context of the story. The energy of it was odd the entire time because of these different things all going on. We actually had gone to one very specific driveway that went down a hill into a little valley, and there was a little nice, beautiful house with like one of those, porches with a wraparound porch. And we were like, that's so pretty. And one of the kids wanted to run down the pathway. We said, no, probably shouldn't go down there. We turned around. We were just playing around. Found out later through talking to these people later that day that was their grandmother's or one of their grandmother's driveway. And they said specifically that she is one of those people they described. If you would have gone down there, she would have taken her shotgun out and shot at you. And we were like, whoa, right? Some city folks up here getting told. Anyway, we're up there for a couple nights. We do some exploring. Again, the energy is very odd. You drive around the woods, and the woods had a quality to it. I described them since as dead woods. There's certain woods that you go out in, and you'll notice, especially during the daytime, there's noises going on. There's birds chirping. There's, things moving around. There's insects and things like that. These woods that didn't have that quality, everywhere you went, people felt like they were hiding in the same way I described just earlier. But not only the people, it was like the animals were too. There was nothing that would move around. We were driving, trying to find a lake at one point up there later on the next day, and we came to this place where we got a little lost. We stopped in the middle of the road, and when we stopped, that's when I noticed this. I got this eerie feeling of being watched, and the reason it was so palpable was because I couldn't hear anything. It was silent. In the middle of these massive woods, in the middle of the day, right? And I commented to my ex, I said, this is odd. These are dead woods. There's nothing moving. There's nothing alive. Where's everything, right? Jumping all around, we found out that those woods are kind of one of the areas that's very well known for those kind of Bigfoot sightings. So, believe of it what you will. You take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, these stories are all anecdotal, but there's ways in which, when you are in the place and you start to experience the feeling of, the energy shift, the hair stand on your neck, those little kind of differences, and like you were saying, the muffling of your hearing. These are senses. This is a sensory experience that is at a different level of it's very subtle. And this is the way that the psychic abilities, kind of manifest. It's through these subtleties, right? You'll notice that you'll pick up things if you look at that level. Anyway, I digress. Moving forward, we came to, I think it was the second or the third night, and we were out having a good time. It was kind of just past dusk, and we're about 12 of us, or maybe 8 of us, not 12. It was a couple kids and a handful of adults, and we're all standing around kind of having a nice night, having some drinks, and I'm standing there, and I'm kind of distracted. I was kind of upset, I think, at something that night, and so I was actually kind of off in my own head. I tend to do that when I get a little overwhelmed. I'll disengage a little bit and try to go somewhere. And so I tend to enjoy stars. I mean, beautiful stars up in this area of Washington. Not a lot of light pollution. And so I'm looking up at the stars, and way off in the distance, all of a sudden, as I'm looking there, I see something, and I comment right away. I'm like, what the hell is that? And everybody kind of turns around and looks, and they're all kind of like, what? Looking like, what? There's not going to be anything. And they all of them are like, what is that? And as I'm looking at it, it's this string of lights. And the best way I could describe it, I'll show you here a video here of, this is what they told me it was, but I promise you this wasn't what I actually saw. I'll show you an example. The Starlink satellites is the closest thing I've ever seen it look like. Starlink satellites, if you've ever seen them in the sky, when they go over, they look like a trail of, like this. So they look like a kind of a trail of lights like that. And initially, that's very close to what it looked like, but there was a difference, a couple of things that were happening as we were looking at it. So imagine that, but this was way off in the distance, just coming over the horizon. And so we all start to kind of like, we're blinking, we're trying to figure out, are we seeing something? And it's moving towards us. And as it gets closer, we recognize that's one of the big differences from the Starlinks, that it's not that far away from us. Like whatever we're looking at, it's a string of lights, but it looks like running lights on the side of something really big, right? And you can't see what it is, which is a really hard thing to describe. It makes you sound crazy as soon as you start to say it out loud. You could see the lights. You could see that they were consistent. And that's one of the differences between the Starlinks and what we saw that night too, is like, as you can see here, these are all in a line, but they're kind of unevenly spaced. What I remember seeing was very consistent. It was like running lights on the side of a car or a boat or something, but very evenly spaced, like portholes, right? With light coming out of it. But that's all you could see. It's like the edge of something. But the thing was huge. Like it would be the size in the sky, if I had to describe or give you an example of like one of those destroyers. Like here, let's see. Yeah, one of these destroyers. One of these guys, It was like in the sky, that's how big it looked. It would have been this huge thing. But again, you couldn't see it. So it's almost like, the best way I could describe is this string of lights, and it starts to move over us, and we're looking at it, and we're all talking and freaking out and trying to figure out what we're seeing. And as it continues to move, it goes right over us. And when it's over us, it looked, from what I could tell, like it was only a couple thousand feet from over top of us. And we're in the side of the mountain, so there's like this peak over here, and it's coming this way, and we're standing right here. And we're looking up, and as it gets over us, you can see behind, towards the edge of it, the back end of it, that there's this kind of glow, I guess is the best way you could describe it. Almost pulsing, but it was like what you would see if you had like a camera flare or a lens flare or something, but a constant one behind the tail end of it, right? And it was kind of pulsing ever so slightly. And it kept on moving. And like I said, this was about 5 minutes. We had long enough to all not know what it was. And even the very skeptical people kind of got to a point where they started to freak out a little bit and were like, what the hell is going on? And it got over the top. And as it got close to the edge of the mountain, this is what really clued us in that this was not Starlink, right? Was as it got to the mountain, the lights all went away. but they did it in like this kind of like started from one side, and as it got to the edge of the horizon, just but before it went over the edge of the horizon. And we're all like freaking out, like, did you see that? We just saw a UFO. And then we proceeded for the next hour to look up at the sky because it was so clear, and you could see these little dots, looked like satellites. And you can tell the satellites when they're going over you when it's that clear, because they go in a very specific orbit. They go in a line, right? What we were seeing was these like satellite looking dots, but they were going like towards each other. They'd come towards each other and they'd bounce and go off at random directions. And there was a lot of them. There was so many that we stood there for, like I said, over an hour, I think, looking at these things, pointing them out after this happened, right? It's like little baby ships out of a starship or something. That's the best thing I could describe. Again, saying it out loud because it comes from science fiction makes you feel like you're crazy, but I can promise you this was something that was very real to us, at least. And then, to make it even crazier, as we're looking up at the sky, we're all distracted. One of my ex's sons once walks up to me and says, "Hey, Chris, there's something over in the bushes looking at me. It has red eyes." And I'm like, in my head, my adult brain's like, yeah, okay, like, let's go see what it is. And we walk over, and this is dark, mind you. This is very dark at this point. We walk over, and about 50 feet away from us is a old trailer, and there's a tree, and it kind of goes into more of the woods after that. There's a bunch of trees. And there was a little light hanging off like the side of like a post right next to the trailer, or like the trailer itself. You couldn't tell, but it was a very dim, like orange light, like a mosquito light almost. And then under that, he points, he's like, look, right over there. And under that, sure as shit, just like he said, are these two glowing red eyes staring, right? And as soon as I saw them, I chills, right up the back of my neck. I could feel that was something looking at me. But I didn't want to freak him out. So I told him, I was like, oh, no, I see it, but I think it's probably just lights off of that or whatever, because I wanted to make sure he wasn't freaking out. But inside, I'm like freaking out. What the hell is that? And so I go over right away, and I grab my ex, and I'm like, hey, there's like something in the bushes. Like, Ian's not making stuff up. And so we go back over to I show her, and she kind of gets a weird heebie-jeebie feelings at the same time, and everybody kind of gets the feeling like maybe we should go to bed. And so we all start to pack up and go to bed. And so I decide I need to go to the bathroom, and I go to walk behind the tent. There's this little wooden fence right behind the tent, and like some kind of grapevine bush kind of thing growing out the edge of it, right at where the corner is, the 90-degree corner. And I walk towards that to kind of find a place to go pee. And as I go to kind of unbuckle my pants to, do my stuff, I have glasses on, and there's this flash, and I've never had something scare me so bad, so quickly, because at the same time I felt something like past me like that. I felt the brush past me. The best thing I could describe was like, it felt like I walked up on something that I couldn't see, but I unintentionally like trapped it. So it was in this corner, it was like standing there, and I turned to go walk right where it was, like standing almost. That's what it felt like. And as soon as I got like right up to it, that's what it felt like. And I could only see it when it moved. And it was this shimmer in the side of it. It looked like it was on the side of my glasses, but it was so bright. And I felt almost like the wind move, but like the energy move at the same time. And it made me jump like out of my shoes almost. I jumped so high, and it was all I could do was to get back around into the tent and kind of get all bundled up and stuff. And as I laid there for the next couple of hours, I heard footsteps, very gentle, dainty footsteps going around our campsite, and tinkering with things, moving like cups and stuff, and it wasn't animals, because we had been there a couple of nights before, and we hadn't heard anything like this. This was different, and it was all in a line, right? So we see this huge ship thing. We see all these small lights. We see these eyes down on the ground, and then I almost run into something. I almost have a heart attack, and then hear little footsteps the entire night. It was so much, and like honestly kind of so overwhelming, that immediately my brain wanted to deny it. And I think that's why it's so important what Brandon Fugal is doing here, and that kind of authenticity to bring this forward. He initially didn't want to have that attention. He remained anonymous, but after becoming an experiencer, like he's saying, you almost have a duty to share that with the world, because it was something that really happened to you. And there's other people that have experienced that. And unless we say that out loud, it will never be the thing that's recognized. It will never be recognized properly as true in the way that it deserves to be. Anything that is true deserves to be recognized as true, whether it's scary or not, right? And so that's one of that really nice fundamental messages coming out of this episode of the Shawn Ryan Show and Brandon Fugal. But I'd obviously recommend that you check out the show, Skinwalker Ranch itself. This one, it's called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and you can watch, I believe, on the History Channel, or you just search it. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. But really interesting show. I've watched the first season. I'm going to go back, obviously, after this and watch a bunch more of it. But you'll see more of Brandon in that show as well. So it's, you kind of get to know him a little bit better through that show. So let's move on. There's another clip that I have here that I wanted to go through, and I don't even really remember what it was. So I'm kind of watching this again for the second time with you guys, and we'll see what kind of messages come through, see what comes through. This is a little later on. This is 209 in the same episode, the first part here.
And we just kind of finished up your first experience of seeing phenomena and UFOs at the ranch. And so there's a couple questions, just rewinding. Or maybe you had to, so I know you had mentioned that Bigelow did not really reveal much of what was going on at that ranch, but I would think that after that day, you had to be dying to get back in touch with him and ask questions after what you just experienced. Did you do that?
I reached out to his people, to Dr. Kelleher and others that had been advising Mr. Bigelow, and asked if there's any way we could share data from the past or collaborate, simply to better understand the nature of the phenomena at the ranch. And Mr. Bigelow was not interested, and that's okay. I respected it. He wanted to hold all of that, keep it close to the vest, and we. I don't mean to have this pregnant pause.
You can see right here, right? This requires courage, what he's doing. It's very easy for us to sit here and watch somebody saying something like this and kind of even judge sometimes and be like, that's silly or whatever they're saying. But when you see somebody here really contemplating what they're about to say, you have to, you can really place yourself in their shoes if you want to, and recognize that comes from a place of a deep place that requires a lot of determination and resilience to be able to muster the strength to speak that kind of truth, that kind of deep experience that can have ramifications in your life that could, affect you negatively. So, this is something that's coming through for all of us. You specifically as somebody watching, what is your version of this? Like, everybody has something like this they need to say, or they have experience that they haven't said out loud. Doesn't mean you have to do it in exactly the same way that Brandon is doing it. But there's something in this message of authenticity, but specifically radical honesty, even the things that most people would use against you, specifically those things. Let's continue to watch.
So I'm going to answer your question well. So, and the truth is, within weeks following that event, I wanted to pull together an advisory board and Mr. Bigelow to discuss our investigation and what we had been experiencing at the ranch, what had been documented. And so we pulled everyone together months later at at the ranch, and also hosted a gathering in Salt Lake City in the spirit of collaboration. And even though a lot of it was focused on just discussing what had been reported and experienced in the past on the property, we were discussing the future scientific protocols and the investigation. And I was very clear with everyone that I wanted to use scientific rigor and discipline to carefully document the phenomena and ultimately understand the nature of what was happening. There has been great disagreement relative to the origin and the agenda associated with the phenomena, not just at Skinwalker Ranch, but globally. There's a lot of divide, a lot of different opinions. So there's some people who say that it's all benevolent, that we're being visited by beings from other world that are benevolent beings and star people, and there are others that say that there's a more insidious, a darker motive and agenda. They point to the cattle mutilation phenomena. I mean, you're talking over 10,000 reported and documented cases. You can bet on the fact that there are probably over 100,000 that have been unreported that have occurred. I mean, it's been called the greatest unsolved crime spree in the country. And there's still no explanation. No one has been caught.
Still to this day.
To this day, no one has been caught in the act of, conducting a cattle mutilation. It's very mysterious. And of course, that's part of the history. There have been a lot of bizarre cattle mutilations that have occurred on this property that are well documented. Mr. Bigelow, to his credit, brought in a veterinarian, brought in experts to consult and provide reports. Within the first several months of opening the ranch up for a docuseries effort, of course, we had a young calf, 2-year-old calf, perfectly healthy, die just south of Homestead 1, right there near the fence line, and investigated that incident. Of course, we had multiple smartphones that were malfunctioning, both an iPhone and a Samsung Galaxy device that were both malfunctioning simultaneous with the investigation and discovery of the cow. We had, elevated gamma and other readings that were documented. And then, of course, an object that was captured by the camera surveillance going over right above that cow right about the time that it died, that it fell over. And I think one of the most intriguing parts of that part of the investigation is the fact that even when bringing out the Utah State veterinarian, again, this is the veterinarian for the state of Utah with the Department of Agriculture, who comes out over a year after the cow died to inspect the site, to inspect the carcass, finding no predator activity. It had remained completely untouched, mysteriously, on a piece of property where nothing
doesn't happen in nature.
Nothing survives. Any dead animal is quickly dispatched by any number of coyotes.
Are you saying the cow had not decomposed and it wasn't drugged off by predators or anything?
No predator or scavenger activity had touched it.
That's great.
In a year.
Over a year.
Wow.
The Utah State veterinarian proceeded to order tests, actually took samples. Those tests revealed that there was no poisoning. There was nothing unusual that they could point to that would account for the absolute lack of predator or scavenger activity. And to this day, it remains one of the most mysterious incidents captured on camera and well documented, involving third-party experts that remain baffled.
Again, without showing you too much more of the show, fascinating is, I think the reason that I tagged that was just because of how how fascinating I found that retelling of that specific part of the story. It's something that you can watch for yourself. Anybody that's listening, if you do find that show, the Skinwalker Ranch show, it's in the first season, kind of towards the end, I believe. But I saw the episode, and you can see some of the evidence he's talking about. You can watch this happen in real time because they were shooting a documentary Discovery or History Channel series when it happened, right? So this is one of the reasons why I think this figure is significant, why it's important to cover Brandon Fugal and what's going on here at Skinwalker Ranch, because it actually aligns quite oddly in some other ways with, the experiences that I just described that I've had in my life before. And, I wonder how often people have experiences, maybe not exactly like what Brandon's had or what I've had, but maybe similar parts of it. You might have experienced something similar in the way that he was describing his ear hearing going away. There's these very subtle ways that they're not subtle in the moment, but they're so odd in the way your senses can shift at times that it feels like they're adjusting to something that you're not seeing, right? And Brandon Mr. Fugal there does a good job of describing it. And that's something that I was experiencing that night that I was telling you about, the stories that I saw the aliens, right? There's more similarities in the Skinwalker Ranch story as well. I believe they do talk about there being red eyes, skinwalkers themselves, and we're going to do a little bit of research in that before we kind of sign off and call it for this episode. There'll be more obviously coming here soon, but I want to research that really quick. So let's check out Skinwalker Ranch. I want to find more stuff on just skinwalkers and see if we can. There you go. Let's see. I want to see what they look like, because they have a typical. So here's the background of the skinwalker. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. The term is never used for healers. That's the background. In the Navajo language, Yinal Delushi refers to, by means of it, it goes on all fours. While perhaps the most common variety seen in horror fiction by non-Navajo people, the Yinal Delushi is one of several varieties of skinwalkers in Navajo culture. Specifically, they're a type of anti. Navajo witches, including skinwalkers, represent the antithesis of Navajo cultural values, while community healers and cultural workers are known as medicine men and women, or by other positive terms in the community's indigenous languages. Witches are seen as evil, performing harmful ceremonies and manipulating magic in a perversion of the good works medicine people traditionally perform. In order to practice their good works, traditional healers may learn about both good or evil magic in order to protect against evil, but people who choose to become witches are seen as corrupt. The legend of the skinwalker is not well understood outside of Navajo culture, both due to reluctance to discuss the subject with outsiders, as well as what Cherokee Nation academic Adrian Keene says is a lack of necessary cultural context the stories are embedded within. Traditional Navajo people are reluctant to reveal skinwalker lore to non-Navajos, or to discuss it at all among those they do not trust. Keene, founder of the website Native Appropriations, has written in response to non-Navajos incorporating the legends into their writing, and specifically the impact when J.K. Rowling did so. That when this was done, or is done, we as Native people are now open to a barrage of questions about these beliefs and traditions. These are not things that need or should be discussed by outsiders, at all. I'm sorry if that seems unfair. That's how our cultures survive, So you have a little commentary there at the end as well. It's very interesting. So what I'm trying to find is a description of the skinwalker, because before we kind of wrap it up here, one of the things that those red eyes that I saw, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that I've heard skinwalkers having red eyes, that's how they're depicted sometimes. And it just kind of hit my head as I was saying that. Oh, that's not fun. I don't want to see those pictures. Sorry for anybody watching that. Okay, so here, this is on Reddit, but it says many descriptions say that they have glowing red, yellow, or orange eyes. And one story I listened to on YouTube said that it's good. Yeah, so I think it depends. But the whole point being, and I don't want to get too off topic here, obviously, is that there's experiences you can have. Like I hope I've demonstrated today through kind of watching and going over this show with you that you have to validate for yourself through just speaking it out loud. And when you do that, it gives other people in the world an opportunity to do the same. And that kind of authenticity is something that we desperately need in this world. We need more authentic people. That's kind of the, sorry for the pause there. Like, again, I'm trying to learn the transitions here. We need more authentic people. I truly believe, and this is, again, more of a spiritual message, but I believe that the figure of Jesus Christ or the Buddha or any of those, spiritual leaders, the reason that they were so popular is because they were authentic, they were real, right? And they said what they actually believed, what they actually experienced, and that's what you're being called to right now as well. That's what this whole episode is about in different versions of it, whether it's Oliver Anthony speaking, a very contemporary political message, or whether it's, Brandon Fugal on the Shawn Ryan Show, talking about his experience owning and exploring Skinwalker Ranch, or my story about being in Washington, that they're only real when we have the courage to validate them as real, as such. So do that for yourself. Whatever you believe in, especially the things you experienced, the places where you're an experiencer, validate that, speak it out loud. And with that, guys, that's what I have for this kind of new episode of the Unfounded Podcast, this video version. I really hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a little rocky, a little shaky going through it. I was a little nervous doing it because I'm trying to get the hang of transitions and using other content like this. I haven't really done this before, but again, I hope you enjoy it. I hope it comes out good, and I'll continue to produce more of it and see how it develops as we move forward. But there'll be another episode of the channeled messages coming here within the next couple of days. It's a long one. It's going to be it's like a 4-hour episode. So get ready for that. A lot of energy, a lot of messages in that one, packed into a very tight package. So, but I want to thank you again for being a listener, for being a supporter. Check me out at Chris the Sage on TikTok, or follow me on any of the social media platforms at the same name, Chris the Sage. That's with a THA Sage. Or check out my Linktree if you want to follow me or keep up to date on any of the projects I'm working on. And with that, guys, that's the Unfounded Podcast. Lots of love.